Greetings and welcome to today's reading of the Cape Cod Times for Thursday, July 11, 2024. This is Diana. I will be your reader today, and we'll start with Cape weather. Today, a high of 80 degrees, a stray morning shower, breezy and humid. Tonight, 71 degrees, cloudy, a stray thunderstorm, windy and humid. And for tomorrow, Friday, a low of 71 degrees, partly sunny, breezy, and very humid again, a high of 84 degrees. For Saturday, a little cooler, cloudy and humid with a shower in spots, a high of 80 degrees, up from a low of 70 degrees. And for Sunday, 84 degrees for the high, partly sunny and humid. And that concludes our Cape Cod Times Cape weather forecast for the next few days. And we'll be moving on to front page news next. However, before we proceed to front page news, we'll start with the numbers game. The midday drawing numbers for Wednesday, July 10th, were 0348. Again, 0348, the winning numbers in the numbers game. Midday drawing, Wednesday, July 10th. And for Wednesday, July 10th, evening drawing, the winning numbers were 4832. Again, the evening drawing for Wednesday, July 10th, 4832 were the winning numbers in the numbers game. And now, moving on to front page news for the Cape Cod Times, Thursday, July 11th, 2024 edition. And once again, I am your reader, Diana. The first story is Hyannis house fire under investigation. Body was found inside. By Denise Coffey, Cape Cod Times, USA Today Network. Hyannis. Authorities are investigating an early morning fire at an Oakland Drive home on Wednesday after a body was found inside. Barnstable Police Department received a 911 call reporting the fire at 326 Oakland Road at 5:23 a.m., according to a press release from Jake Wark, Public Information Officer with the State Department of Fire Services. The Hyannis fire and Barnstable police were dispatched immediately. They were told people were trapped inside, according to Wark. The house was engulfed in fire when officials arrived. 2 persons were outside the home, but another person was still inside. A second alarm brought fire companies from Yarmouth, Dennis, Barnstable, West Barnstable, Cotuit, and Cotuit, Osterville, Marston's Mills to assist. 2 adult occupants were transported to Cape Cod Hospital. 1 adult man was located deceased in the home, according to the press release. His body was carried to a state medical examiner office van at about 10:25 a.m. Rescue workers held up a large red tarp to block the view from curious onlookers. In an accompanying photograph by Steve Heaslip from the Cape Cod Times, authorities are investigating an early morning fire at 326 Oakland Drive in Hyannis on Wednesday after a body was found inside. 2 people survived the fire, according to fire officials. Quote, a huge ball of flame, end quote. Neighbor Alex Valdovinos, who lives at 340 Oakland Drive, told the Times that his mother awakened him around 5:30 a.m. to tell him the house next door was on fire and to call 911. I ran outside and saw a huge ball of flames, he said. Valdivino said a man who lives in the burning house knocked on their door and told them to leave their home, which is only about 30 feet away. Police and firefighters at the scene declined comment. The State Department of Fire Services released the information on behalf of Hyannis Fire Chief Peter Burke, Work wrote. At mid-morning, still smoldering roof. At mid-morning, firefighters doused the still smoldering roof with water. In the meantime, about a dozen state and local police officers and Hyannis firefighters were combing through the wreckage. Investigators were tossing charred belongings from a room in the house. The fire remains under investigation by the Cape Islands District Attorney's Office, the State Fire Marshal's Office, the Barnstable Police Department, and the Hyannis Fire Department. According to records from the Barnstable Assessor's Office, the house is owned by Burt Realty Trust of Centerville. The 5-room house, which was built in 1958, and land is assessed at $360,000. Dawn Burt is listed as the trustee. The author of this article, Denise Coffey, writes about business, tourism, and issues impacting the Cape's residents and visitors. Contact her at dcoffey@capecodonline.com. In other front page news, support for Biden continues to waver. New Dem detractors emerge, including celebs. Joey Garrison, Ken Tran, Riley Began, and Sarah Dwyer are the authors of this article, and contributors, rather. From USA Today. Washington, just when it looked like President Joe Biden was starting to unite congressional Democrats around his embattled re-election bid, the dam cracked. A drip of calls from party faithful for a dramatic last-minute change atop the Democratic ticket this November is turning into something else entirely. What had started as pleadings from a few lone lawmakers, donors, and media figures in the earliest days after the 81-year-old incumbent's poor performance at his June 27th debate with former President Donald Trump now includes warnings from the country's first ever female House Speaker, plus senior Senate Democrats and some of the nation's most well-known celebrities. First came Senator Michael Bennet, Democrat, Colorado, who said Tuesday night on CNN that Trump could defeat the incumbent Democrat, quote, by a landslide and take it with the Senate and the House, end quote. By Wednesday morning, former Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, Democrat, California, seemed to question whether Biden should stay in the race during the appearance on MSNBC's Morning Joe, a program Biden called into 2 days earlier, defending his 2024 candidacy, and is widely known to regularly watch. Quote, it's up to the president to decide if he is going to run, end quote, Pelosi said, even though Biden has made clear repeatedly since last month's debate that he's still running for re-election. Quote, we're all encouraging him to make that decision because time is running short. When asked if Biden should remain in the Democratic presidential nominee, Senator Tim Kaine, Democrat, Virginia, told News Nation, quote, I have complete confidence that Joe Biden will do the patriotic thing for the country, and he's going to make that decision. He's never disappointed me, end quote. Senator Richard Blumenthal, Democrat from Connecticut, previously supportive of Biden, told reporters he is, quote, deeply concerned about Joe Biden winning this election, end quote. Representative Richie Torres, Democrat, New York, said in a statement, quote, there must be a serious reckoning with the down ballot of whomever we nominate, end quote. Quote, what matters is not how we feel, but what the numbers tell us, end quote, Torres said Wednesday. Biden, who was already trailing Trump in most polls before the debate, is heading into the final months of the campaign a damaged candidate. A USA Today/Suffolk University post-debate poll found Trump ahead of Biden 41% to 38%, gaining 3 percentage points on Biden since the debate. Other polls reflect a similar bounce for Trump. The Biden campaign has tried to reframe the election against Trump, taking aim above all at Project 2025, a set of policy goals created by the right-wing Heritage Foundation for Trump to implement if he's elected to a second term. But they have struggled to succeed. Aiming to shore up support, Biden's campaign is making another effort Thursday by sending 3 senior campaign advisors to meet with Senate Democrats. The full caucus normally only meets once a week. A good 48 hours, and then. The shift comes after most Democrats in Congress have so far held off on publicly calling for Biden to withdraw following his disastrous debate performance last month, even as many express grave concerns about the odds of Biden beating Trump a second time. With his 5 decades in politics on the line, Biden spent Monday and Tuesday on offense to prove he should remain the Democratic nominee. And as of Tuesday, the White House and Biden campaign were pleased overall with the first 48 hours after Congress reconvenes in Washington following a holiday recess. That included gaining backing from House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, and Representative Jim Clyburn of South Carolina, one of the House Democratic Caucus's most influential members. Even so, Schumer gave a quick, evasive answer Tuesday when asked whether he's confident the president has what it takes to win the election and serve another 4 years. Quote, "As I've said before, I'm with Joe," end quote. Although 8 House Democrats have said publicly Biden should end his campaign, no Democratic senators have gone as far, and the president has held on to support from the entire Black and Hispanic caucuses, 2 key voices in the Democratic coalition. A meeting Tuesday morning among congressional Democrats, billed as a, quote, family conversation, revealed a party divided over whether Biden is equipped to lead them to victory. Asked whether Democrats had gotten on the same page, Tennessee Representative Stephen Cohen said, quote, "We're not even in the same book." But the mounting resistance extends beyond the Capitol. Actor George Clooney, a major Democratic donor who just last month co-hosted a lucrative Hollywood fundraiser for Biden, called for a new presidential nominee in a New York Times opinion piece. Quote, "We are not going to win in November with this president. On top of that, we won't win the House and we're going to lose the Senate," end quote, Clooney wrote. Actor and filmmaker Rob Reiner, another deep-pocketed Democratic donor, agreed. Quote, "We acknowledge all he has done for our country, but democracy is facing an existential threat. We need someone younger to fight back. Joe Biden must step aside," end quote, Reiner wrote on X. With the Democratic convention next month in Chicago and Republicans holding their convention next week, Democrats face a time crunch if they want to find a different nominee. Biden, who is hosting a NATO summit this week commemorating the alliance's 75th anniversary, was set to take questions from reporters at a press conference Thursday that some Democrats have circled as an important test for the president. Others are starting to sound the alarm with a greater sense of urgency. Quote, "Joe Biden is a patriot but is no longer the best candidate to defeat Trump," end quote, Representative Pat Ryan, Democrat, New York, who represents a swing district, said in a statement Wednesday, quote, "For the good of the country, I am asking Joe Biden to step aside, to deliver on his promise to be a bridge to a new generation of leaders," end quote. Contributing to this article were Rebecca Morin, Sudiksha Kachi from USA Today. In our next front page news articles for the Cape Cod Times, Thursday edition, July 11, 2024. The next story is entitled, "Millions of Texans Face Brutal Heat Without Power," by Christopher Cann and John Bacon, USA Today. Nearly 2 million homes and businesses remained without power across parts of Texas on Wednesday as the remnants of once mighty Hurricane Beryl pushed north, prompting flood warnings from New Mexico to Maine. The march across land helped weaken the historic Category 5 hurricane to a post-tropical cyclone, but the storm remained dangerous. Beryl's remnants were centered outside Detroit early Wednesday with maximum sustained winds of about 30 miles per hour, moving northeast at 20 miles per hour. Rainfall amounts of 2 to 4 inches were expected across portions of the southern Great Lakes into central and northern New York and northern New England by Thursday, the Weather Service said. The National Weather Service issued flood watches and warnings Wednesday across parts of Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, New York, Vermont, and New Hampshire. The Weather Service office in Buffalo, New York, said severe thunderstorms and tornadoes were possible, but the main threat would be damaging winds. At least 8 fatalities have been reported in Texas and Louisiana, including a Houston police employee who was caught in rising floodwaters Monday. Long lines for gas and other essentials formed across Houston at any business that was selling. Quote, "This was the most widespread damaging winds in the Houston metro, likely since Hurricane Ike in 2008, with similar wind impacts in a lot of places," end quote, AccuWeather Chief Meteorologist Jonathan Porter said. President Joe Biden issued a major disaster declaration for the damage sustained through Houston and the Texas Gulf Coast. Biden said FEMA had generators and other resources on the ground to support the state even before the storm hit, and pledged that federal assistance will remain in Texas until the recovery is complete. Quote, "The greatest concern right now is the power outages and extreme heat," end quote, Biden said in a statement. Quote, "We will provide life-saving and life-sustaining activities and any other federal resource that Texas needs," end quote. Texas power companies reported almost 1.7 million homes and businesses remained without power as a heat advisory for parts of the state was expected to push temperatures above 100 degrees. Another 55,000 were without power in Indiana, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Beryl developed over the Atlantic Ocean on June 28 and quickly intensified into a powerful hurricane before making landfall on Carriacou Island on July 1st. Beryl grew stronger and gained Category 5 status with winds of 165 miles an hour as it roared across the Caribbean. Beryl began to lose some wind power as it hit Jamaica, then made landfall in Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula. At least 11 people died on its journey across the Caribbean, AccuWeather reported. In the U.S., Texas took the brunt of Beryl when it stormed ashore early Monday as a Category 1 hurricane, prompting closures of the largest ports in Texas, including the port of Corpus Christi. AccuWeather estimated the total U.S. economic loss from Beryl at between $28 billion and $32 billion. This figure includes direct damage from the storm, job and wage losses, interruptions of the supply chain, and flight delays and cancellations. Contributing Reuters. In a photograph that accompanies this article, taken by Adriz Latif of Reuters, Marguerite Thomas is pictured lighting candles at dusk Tuesday after losing electricity due to Hurricane Beryl in Surfside Beach, Texas. We now move on to our final front page news article. Election worries cast shadow at NATO summit. By Francesca Chambers and Michael Collins, USA Today. Washington. NATO leaders returned this week to the auditorium where the alliance was born to celebrate its 75 years as a military defense pact and to mull over current and future threats to its stability. Hanging over the three-day summit like a dark cloud, however, is a major concern that's not on the official agenda. The U.S. presidential election. President Joe Biden's physical and mental fitness after last month's calamitous debate and former President Donald Trump's possible return to the White House are cause for alarm among European allies. Quote, "This is an election where the Europeans are paying very close attention," end quote, said Rose Gottemoeller, who was Deputy Secretary General of NATO when Trump was president. Gottemoeller said she has taken several trips to Europe, most recently in June, and, quote, "the first question out of people's mouth was what happens if Donald Trump returns to the White House, and what will happen to the American commitment to NATO and to European defense," end quote. Fueling the fears are Trump's dismissive attitude toward NATO. He has mocked its defense pact as, quote, "obsolete," and threatened to let Russia, quote, "do whatever it wants to member nations that do not carry their weight." The threats have left European governments scrambling to determine whether the U.S. could be counted on to defend them if they were to come under attack. Biden's shaky performance during the debate also alarmed European officials, who watched it with the same level of dismay as many Americans. Dan Fried, the former U.S. ambassador to Poland, was in Warsaw the day of the debate and had a series of meetings with senior Polish officials the next day. Those officials expressed concern about the election, he said. Quote, "I've been hearing for a while from lots of other European officials that those concerns are widely shared," end quote, Fried said. Representative Jerry Connolly, Democrat of Virginia, who was president of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, the organization's legislative arm, said he has tried to reassure nervous European officials. Quote, "They experienced Trump," end quote, he said. And he continued, "and they're very anxious about the prospect of his return," end quote. Connolly said he told them, quote, "We're fighting it out. But from my point of view, American support for NATO and participation in NATO is solid. And we're going to do everything we can to make sure, no matter what the result of our election, that stays that way," end quote. Adding to the instability is that governmental turmoil extends far beyond the United States. Political shifts in Europe. French President Emmanuel Macron suffered a crushing defeat in European Union parliamentary elections in June. He responded by ordering a snap election and a vote nationwide, but the result of that parliamentary election held Sunday muddled things further. Far-right leader Marine Le Pen's National Rally Party won more seats in France's National Assembly than even before, yet fell short of a majority in parliament, thanks to a coalition of left-wing parties that banded together to stop the right-wing surge. The Netherlands swore in its first-ever far-right government last week, and in the its first-ever far-right government last week. And in the United Kingdom, voters handed the government to the Labour Party after 14 years of conservative rule, giving the country its fourth prime minister in less than 2 years. Quote, there are a lot of doubts about the strength of our respective domestic political situations, end quote, a European official told reporters during a briefing on NATO last week. Quote, the goal for that summit is to counter that perspective. NATO is also getting a new Secretary General on October 1st. Former Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte, who left office this month, will replace Jens Stoltenberg at the end of his term. Stoltenberg has been in the role for the past 10 years and got along well with Trump. But it is the U.S. election that is particularly worrisome for European officials, who for decades have counted on the United States' commitment to the Mutual Defense Alliance ever since Western nations banded together to sign the North Atlantic Treaty in an auditorium a few blocks from the White House on April 4th, 1949. Quote, I think people want reassurance, especially from the United States, end quote, Connolly said. Dangerous and deeply irresponsible, in quotes. Trump's comments about leaving lagging European countries to fend for themselves have been interpreted by some as a threat to leave the alliance. His constant disparaging of NATO and his threat to withhold Article 5 defense protections against members who don't meet their 2% pledge is alarming to NATO members, Fried said. Quote, I think people should just relax and see where it's going to go, end quote, a source close to Trump told USA Today. Quote, and if it's got them a little bit nervous, I don't think that's necessarily bad. It's a good discussion point, end quote. But Bradley Bowman, senior director of the Center on Military and Political Power at the Foundation for Defense Democracies, a Washington-based think tank, said remarks disparaging NATO are unhelpful. Quote, when we invest in NATO, we're investing in our own national security, and we're deterring war, end quote, Bowman said. Quote, any comments from American political leaders, whoever that leader might be, that in any way undermines NATO, makes its deterrent less credible, is dangerous and deeply irresponsible, end quote. Trump repeated several of his previous complaints in a social media post on Tuesday afternoon. Quote, if it weren't for me as president, there probably would be no NATO by now, end quote, he said on his social media platform, Truth Social, in a post that claimed European countries, quote, owe the United States billions for assistance to Ukraine. Quote, I expect the U.S. to remain a strong NATO ally, regardless of the outcome of the elections, end quote, said Stoltenberg, who, as NATO Secretary General, worked with Trump for all 4 years of his term. In a photograph that accompanies this article by Jim Watson of AFP via Getty Images, President Joe Biden speaks during the NATO 75th anniversary celebratory event at the Mellon Auditorium in Washington. European leaders are closing, watching the U.S. presidential election unfold. We are now at the approximate halfway point in our reading of the Cape Cod Times for Thursday, July 11, 2024. And once again, I'm your reader, Diana. This is the time we usually go to the obituary section. And today we have 5. the first of which is for Gaylord Brent Bigelow from Pocasset. Mr. Gaylord Brent Bigelow of Pocasset, Massachusetts, passed away on July 7th at the age of 82 after losing his long heroic battle with Parkinson's disease. Gay was born in Gouverneur, New York, where he worked his family farm. Later in life, he moved to Massachusetts, where he started his own landscaping business and pursued his desire to fly airplanes. He achieved that goal and later became a flight instructor. Gaylord could always be found working in his yard, remodeling his home, or tinkering with anything. He worked hard, and during the winters he resided at his second home in Isla Mirada, Florida. Gaylord is predeceased by his parents, artist and Alan Bigelow of Gouverneur, New York, his brother Adrian Bigelow of Gouverneur, New York, his sister Valerie Bigelow Pulver of Canton, New York, his daughter, just this past November, Randy Bigelow Khrushchev. Gay is also survived by 4 nephews and 1 niece. Gaylord did not wish to have services. If anyone would like to make a donation to the Parkinson's Foundation in the memory of Gaylord, they can do so at www.apdaparkinson.org. His mischievous smile, nature, and his kind heart will be remembered by all who knew and loved him. Our next obituary is for William Edward Murphy, Jr., Osterville and Wesley, age 74, affectionately known as Bill or Murph. He passed away peacefully in his home on Sunday, July 7th, after a valiant battle with interstitial lung disease. Bill is survived by his wife of 47 years, Nancy Curtin, his son William Tripp, and daughter Shannon. He's also survived by his beloved daughter-in-law Lee and his 2 grandchildren, Teddy and Lou. Born in Worcester, Massachusetts, to parents William and Margaret Murphy, Bill leaves his sisters Karen Birmingham and her late husband Jack and Paula Leader, and her husband Phil, as well as many wonderful nieces, nephews, grandnieces, grandnephews, and extended family members. Bill's family will receive visitors on Monday, July 15th, 2024, from 10 to 11 a.m., followed by his massive Christian burial at Our Lady of Victory Church, 230 South Main Street, Centerville. In lieu of flowers, we ask that a donation be made to the Joey Fund, joeyfund.org. For a complete obituary, go to www.donbealaimshyannis.com. Our next obituary is for Lois E. Eaton from Harwich. Lois Elizabeth Eaton, 92, of Harwichport, Massachusetts, died on July 2nd, 2024. Lois was predeceased by her parents, Kenneth Frank and Dora Kuhdorf Eaton, and first cousin Judith Beeler. Lois was a longtime member of the United Methodist Church, 1 South Hadley Falls, where she grew up. She went on to attend 3 colleges: Green Mountain College, Associates of Arts, Plymouth Teachers College, BA in Education, and Bridgewater State, Massachusetts, MA in Education. Lois taught elementary school for 33 years, 25 of them in Westerly, Rhode Island. After retirement, Lois moved to Harwichport, Massachusetts, where she made her full-time residence since 1987, though she had been spending summers there since 1963, when she became a member of Pilgrim Congregational Church. Lois was involved with the church women's group and sang in the choir for 25 years. Lois loved being with people and seeing other parts of the world. She traveled extensively with friends across the U.S., Canada, and Europe. An avid Celtic and Red Sox fan, Lois attended many games at Fenway Park, and as many as possible in her front row seat in front of the TV at home. Lois loved reading, especially biographies and historical novels. Lois leaves behind her first cousin, Mary Lou Garish, as well as her faithful caregiver of 22 years, Stephanie Culver, caregivers Corey Fellows and Joanne Hinesley, as well as many beautiful friends who were by her side always. A memorial service will be held on Thursday, July 25th at 11 a.m. at Pilgrim Congregational Church, 533 Route 28, Harwichport, Massachusetts, with a reception to follow. Notes of comfort may be made to her family at www.chapmanfuneral.com. Our next obituary is for James F. Buckley from Yarmouthport. Reverend James F. Buckley died July 7, 2024. He was ordained at St. Mary's, Fall River, and retired as pastor of Holy Redeemer Parish, Chatham. He is survived by his sister, Christine Buckley. The funeral mass is July 13th, 11 a.m. at St. Pius X, Yarmouth, Massachusetts. In lieu of flowers, please donate to the St. Vincent de Paul Society or the Mary Knoll Fathers. And our final obituary reading for today is for David E. Primrose. On Cape Cod, David E. Primrose, 66, of Cape Cod, passed away June 30th after a long and courageous battle with cancer. Born in Milford, Connecticut in 1957, Dave was the youngest child of Earl E. Primrose and Beth H. Waterhouse Primrose. He graduated from Milford High and moved to Cape Cod in 1980. Shortly after, he met Sandra Hutchins, and they married in 1982. They had 2 daughters, Nicole and Megan. Dave was employed as a truck driver for various companies until retiring due to health reasons. He enjoyed buying and selling antiques and worked with his wife in their antique business for many years. He loved rock music and knew the name of every band member and history of each band, no matter how well known they were. After retiring, he taught himself to play guitar as a hobby. He leaves behind his wife Sandy, daughters Nicole Primrose, Megan Brian St. Germain, brothers Richard Primrose, William D., Patricia Primrose, and numerous nieces, nephews, cousins, and many friends and extended family. He was most proud of his 7 grandchildren, Haley, Michaela, Emma, Connor, Noah, and twins Owen and Aiden. He was predeceased by his parents, sisters-in-law Joyce and Stacy, niece Wendy, cousin Porky, and in-laws Conrad and Janice Hutchins. We would like to give special thanks to Dr. Ward and his entire staff, Dr. Kowal and Mark Tayo of Urology Associates and Beacon Hospice for their compassionate care. Services are private. We'll now move on to Nation and World Briefs, USA Today Network, and Reuters. Haley DeSantis denied speaking roles at convention. After a bitter primary, former President Donald Trump's main GOP rivals, Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis, have worked to make amends. Yet neither will be speaking at the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee next week. Haley won't be attending. A spokesman said she wasn't invited. DeSantis will be in Milwaukee, but only on the periphery, according to a source familiar with the planning. Showcasing future talent and promoting party unity typically are the key elements of political conventions, and both Haley and DeSantis are potential presidential candidates in 2028. The diss may be a sign that Trump feels he's in a strong position and doesn't need to worry about unity. It also could be a sign of lingering tensions. Trump framed both DeSantis and Haley's presidential bids as acts of betrayal. 3 states asked Supreme Court to block SAVE student loan plan. And in emergency filing, Tuesday, Alaska, South Carolina, and Texas asked the Supreme Court to block President Joe Biden's new student debt relief plan, which is SAVE, capitalized SAVE, saying the High Court should reverse a recent ruling by the 10th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals that allowed a key part of the plan to resume. They say the program will cost the public hundreds of billions of dollars unless the Supreme Court intervenes. Last month, federal judges in Missouri and Kansas blocked parts of the income-driven repayment program known as Saving on a Valuable Education, or SAVE. The plan has lowered monthly payments to $0 for millions of borrowers. Days later, the 10th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals put on hold the ruling from the district judge in Kansas after the Biden administration appealed that decision. As a result, the Education Department said it would continue cutting undergraduate loan payments and directed loan servicers it contracts with to move forward with changes under the SAVE plan. The White House has said more than 20 million borrowers could ultimately benefit. And our next news brief story, Sotomayor's security team shoots alleged carjacker near her home. A deputy U.S. Marshal protecting Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor shot a teenager attempting to carjack the officer's vehicle last week, according to court records and other reports. The marshal was on duty with another officer in an unmarked vehicle around 1:17 a.m. on July 5th when 18-year-old Kentrell Flowers allegedly pulled up next to the marshal's vehicle in a silver Toyota Sienna minivan, got out, and pointed a .40 caliber Smith & Wesson pistol through the driver's side window, according to a statement by Deputy Marshal Tyler Wells. The officers, both of whom were wearing shirts identifying them as marshals, were protecting Sotomayor, who has a condo on the street where the shooting occurred, according to the Daily Mail, which first reported the connection. Flowers was treated at the hospital for non-life-threatening injuries. He has been charged with assaulting law enforcement officers and attempting carjacking. A court date is pending. And in our next Nation and World brief, F-16 jets being sent to Ukraine from Denmark and the Netherlands. Washington. The first batch of U.S.-built F-16 fighter jets are already being transferred to Ukraine from Denmark and the Netherlands and will be flying over Ukrainian skies this summer, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said on Wednesday. Blinken, speaking at an event on the sidelines of the NATO summit in Washington, said a robust package from Ukraine will be unveiled over the next couple of days that will build a clear and strong bridge for Ukraine's NATO membership. Reinforcing air defenses has been crucial for Ukraine as it fights a Russian invasion. Moscow renewed its aerial assaults on Ukraine's national power grid in the spring, causing sweeping blackouts. President Volodymyr Zelensky said last week that he wanted to double Ukraine's air defense capacity over the summer and that his country needed at least 7 additional Patriot systems to protect itself. And in another national news brief, Yellowstone gunman killed in National Park shootout identified. A shooting incident at Yellowstone National Park in the early hours of the 4th of July has left one park ranger injured and the suspect dead, the Park Service said in a news release. The ranger was reported as being in stable condition after the incident, the National Park Service, NPS, said. Park rangers received a report that a person with a gun, now identified as 28-year-old Samson Lucas Barry of Fusner, was making threats in the popular Canyon Village area. Rangers made contact and exchanged gunfire with the individual, NPS said. Fusner, from Milton, Florida, died after an, quote, armed altercation with at least one park ranger, end quote, the Park County Sheriff's Office said in a post on Monday. Local outlets have reported that Fusner was a contractor working at Yellowstone through the Xanterra Travel Collection. And in our next news and world brief story, mummified remains of American climber found 22 years later. The mummified remains of an American mountaineer have been found 22 years after he went missing while climbing Mount Huascarán, Peru's highest summit, authorities said Tuesday. Peruvian police and mountain rescue workers recovered the body of William Stampfel on July 5th after it was found by climbers near a camp about 17,060 feet above sea level, police said in a statement. Stampfel and two friends, Steve Erskine and Matthew Richardson, were caught in an avalanche in June 2002, the Los Angeles Times reported at the time. Only Erskine's body had been recovered, according to the newspaper. Stampfel's body, gear, clothing, and belongings, including his driver's license and passport, had been well preserved by freezing temperatures and the ice, according to Peruvian police. He was 58 when he died. Edson Ramirez, a park ranger at Huascarán National Park, said the glacial mass in the region has been retreating for about 10 years. Quote, what was buried years ago is coming to the surface, end quote, Ramirez told Reuters. And next we have a national and U.S. sports brief. Meet Team USA for the 2024 Paris Olympics by Tom Shad and Nancy Armour of the USA Today. Team USA is officially set for the 2024 Paris Olympics. The U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee on Wednesday unveiled the full final roster for its 2024 Olympic team, a group of nearly 600 athletes who will represent the United States across 31 different sports in Paris. Gymnast Simone Biles, swimmer Katie Ledecky, and sprinter Noah Lyles are among the returning Olympians and presumptive gold medal favorites who headline Team USA, which is expected to bring one of the largest delegations to the Paris Games. The team will feature athletes from 45 states and the District of Columbia, ranging in age from 16 to almost 60. And while it will include hundreds of first-time Olympians, it will also have a few six-timers too. Sarah Hirschland, the chief executive officer of the USOPC, said in a teleconference last month that U.S. officials would not make public predictions about how this group will fare at the Paris Games, which run from July 26 to August 11th. Quote, but we certainly do expect to have a very strong performance, as we have historically seen in these games, end quote, Hirschland said. Quote, and it is important to us because it's important to athletes. They come to these games to be wildly successful, end quote. Here's a closer look at the 2024 U.S. Olympic team. How many athletes are on Team USA? There are 592 athletes on the 2024 U.S. Olympic team, which makes it a slightly smaller group than the team at the most recent Summer Games in Tokyo, 613 athletes, but quite a bit larger than the 2016 team in Rio de Janeiro, 554. The U.S. will have at least one athlete competing in 31 of the 32 sports on the Paris program, with team handball the only exception. Track and field, unsurprisingly, has the largest contingent with 120 athletes, while rhythmic gymnastics and modern pentathlon have one each. Women will also make up the majority of the U.S. Olympic team in Paris, with 314 athletes set to represent Team USA in women's events, which is 53%, compared to 278 men, 47%. Nearly 1 in 5 athletes on the 2024 U.S. Olympic team hail from a single state, California. The Golden State will have more than twice as many athletes on Team USA than runner-up Florida, which will have 44. Texas is the third highest-ranking home state among U.S. athletes, with 38. Only 5 states do not have a single representative on the 2024 Olympic team: Arkansas, Maine, North Dakota, West Virginia, and Wyoming. There will be 3 16-year-olds on the U.S. Olympic team for the Paris Games. These are the youngest athletes on Team USA. Although gymnast Hesley Rivera, who just turned 16 last month, is the actual youngest. Paige Hayne, skateboarding, and Quincy Wilson, track and field, are the others. In total, the U.S. will have 32 teenagers on its Olympic roster, including 6 skateboarders. And as for the oldest members of Team USA, once again they are on the equestrian team. Stephen Peters will celebrate his 60th birthday in September. And according to NBC, via Olympic data website, Only Mad Men, he will be the oldest U.S. athlete to compete at the Summer Olympics since 1936. Laura Kraut, another equestrian athlete, is 58. And the third oldest member of Team USA in Paris will be shooter Keith Sanderson, who is making his 4th Olympic appearance at age 49. We will now be concluding today's reading of the Cape Cod Times for Thursday, July 11, 2024, with Ask Carolyn by Carolyn Hacks. The first topic, stepmom wants, quote, normal Italy retreat versus always deferring to kid. Reader writes, Dear Carolyn, my husband has custody of his 8-year-old daughter every other weekend. In our 5 years together, I have been utterly respectful of his duties as a father and his kids' well-being. But I have been invited to do a 7-week fellowship and retreat in Italy, and I would love to bring my husband. We have never taken a nice trip together. We didn't even really do a honeymoon because of work and his kid. He said no to Italy because it would mean missing 3 or 4 visits from his daughter. For the first time, I felt mad and deprived. The other participants will have their partners there, exploring the city while we work. I want us to do this one normal thing. It is not possible to bring the kid with us. If my husband came with me for a little while, then he could stay for longer than about 10 days, minus travel time. He couldn't stay longer than about 10 days minus travel time. So that's not worth it either. Am I being totally selfish to want this? I feel that way, but I also feel entitled to want this normal thing. My one confidant about this, my mom, says it's what I signed on for when I chose a man with a child. Signed, selfish? ? Carolyn writes or responds with selfish? Question mark. Your mom's right. This is exactly what you agreed to, eyes open. But that doesn't mean you always have to like it. Must always exude daisies and sunbeams, and can't ever feel, quote, mad and deprived. Just go feel mad and deprived somewhere outside the range of your stepdaughter so you can let it dissipate naturally. If you plan to keep confiding in Mom, then tell her you know it's what you, quote, signed on for, end quote, but you have unresolved feelings you'd like to talk through so they don't keep gnawing at you. If Mom can't be that person for you, then choose someone who is able to agree with you that weeks overseas retreating together is, quote, normal because, well, let's just say I'm amusing myself with the mental image of the reception you'll get if you choose wrong. I kid, but a therapist is a good option here if feasible. Family blending is hard. Which brings me to my second point. Having your moment to feel bad about missing out on something you want is more than mere self-indulgence. It's about healthy emotional management. If your response to your husband's no-go on Italy were, quote, it's a-okay, honey, because I'm so lucky to be your spouse and a step-parent, end quote, then that would be forced and weird and with repetition distorting. Others wouldn't know how you really felt, and eventually you might not either. So it's important to trust that you can be 100% confident in your marriage and 100% pro-healthy stepchild and still be bummed sometimes, out loud, about the restrictions on your husband's time without feeling guilty about it. So here's what I'm thinking. Maybe you're overdue just to be you, where you recognize you aren't a saint and can't always smile off the cost of your choices, even as you know you made them willingly and would make them again because he passes every character test, and where you ask your husband to bear with you as you freely, lovingly meet others' needs while also learning to understand and make room for your own. Well, listeners, that concludes today's reading. That's all we have time for with Dear Carolyn. Once again, it was the Cape Cod Times reading of Thursday, July 11th, 2024. And your reader was Diana, excuse me. And thank you for listening. Hoping you're having a great day, great rest of your day, and we'll conclude today's session until next week. Thank you very much. Have a great day.